Yeah, really high end. So it's like,
Yeah.
setting things on fire in front of tables and stuff.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
So we're hit record, and my guest today is Ed Beeson. And Ed, you have had a long career in the food and music industry, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit more than that. But I found you. I got to give a shout out to. I was introduced to you as a possible guest on the show through a mutual friend of ours, Michael Wansley. Mike is somebody I've known for, I don't want to say how many years because he'll get mad at me, but a long time. We were roommates in college back at Central. Found out a few minutes ago, Ed, you went to Central too. So
that's correct.
Why don't you tell our listeners, give us a little capsule of your story, and then we'll jump out from there.
Okay. Well, I was always the kid in high school that was pegged as knowing the most about music. I really loved music. I couldn't play a lick. Going back to grade school in Seattle at Whittier, I remember, whether I was in choir or in the band, I tried it all. They would always, if it was in the choir, they'd say, just move your lips, don't try to sing. And if I was in the band, I was playing my grandfather's trombone, they'd say, just move it back and forth. But, don't try to play. Go home and practice, and maybe we'll let you actually play in the band. So that kind of, but I never lost my passion for music. My oldest sister managed an act, in a jazz act in Seattle, Overton Berry, for quite a few years. And so I got exposed to, jazz and blues and stuff like that at a very early age. The first record I ever bought, I remember buying the stereo and the album on the same day down at Gerke Music in Ballard on Market Street. And I think they sold refrigerators and stoves too. But anyway, I bought this little Magnavox portable stereo and went home and played Ray Charles, Modern Sounds and Country and Western Music back in 1961, I think it came out. And so I was, in high school, I was, the guy who hired the band to play at the prom and the senior trip and stuff like that. And then when I went off to college in Ellensburg, I even got a little involved in the music scene there, mostly just going out and doing some underage drinking in the bars. But
nobody did that in Ellensburg.
No, that's not true. There was a lot of that going on. So yeah, go ahead.
So let me ask you this: when you were in Ellensburg, I'm just seeing if there's, because you're older than I am, but I wonder if there's any overlap. Where were you going in Ellensburg? What were the central spots at the time you were there?
Well, of course, the ranch was the big one, but
okay.
There was one down across from the Webster Hotel, which of course burned down. But I ended up owning. That's where I got into the restaurant business. This is why I'm going down this path. But while I was in school, I got involved with presenting a show at the college that had. It was kind of the history of African Americans in American popular music. And so two of the names that I remember working with was U.B. Blake and John Lee Hooker. And I spent one evening in U.B. Blake's hotel room, the Holiday Inn down by the freeway. And
I laugh because I worked there.
Me too.
I was a bellboy and a bartender there. I was like,
I was a waiter there. Anyway, so I helped put this gig together at the campus, and then got to hang out with John Lee Hooker and U.B. Blake in UB's hotel room, and they did a little gig that night in the bar where you were the bartender. There, you probably never knew this, but U.B. Blake and John Lee Hooker jammed on that stage.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
My claim to fame is that I got asked to carry the bags to his room for Sammy Hagar.
Oh, wow, cool.
And I served dinner to Huey Lewis and the News. Those are my two, name drop moments from the Holiday Inn of my era.
Yeah, so when I left Ellensburg, moved back to Seattle, pretty much out of desperation because I couldn't make a living there. By then, it was when my second kid was on the way, and I was still trying to go to school and running a little restaurant in town.
What restaurant were you running? What was it?
Well, we called it the Valley Cafe originally, and then it was taken over by the Outrageous Taco people when we left, and this was back in 1970.
Same location that the Valley Cafe is in now?
And now, I was just going to say, then people bought it again later from the Outrageous Taco people and changed it to the Valley Cafe. So it was that building. That building had been vacant for like 20 years when me and my high school buddies, went in there and we completely restored that space. It was quite a fun project.
So you were involved with setting up the bar and all of that? All that
woodwork
that was in there?
Yeah, well, that's what's the cool thing about that story. When we got to that building, there was nothing up above. I mean, the floors were like just this solid dirt colored. We weren't even sure what was below it. And there was none of the booths, none of the countertop. The only thing that was still there was the back bar, the old refrigerated case back there. But everything else had been meticulously taken apart and stored in the basement. And so that was what we did. It didn't even have a functioning heat or air conditioning when we took it over. We were paying $150 a month for that place in 1970. Just a bunch of young kids, who were going to move to the restaurant business, and we did live music there. That was music has always been part of what I've done. But then I moved back to Seattle, and I got lost. Just now I had 2 kids, and I had to make a living, and I really kind of got way off into the restaurant business. And but I was always had the good fortune of working at like the best places in town. Where there's when I moved back to Seattle and was 21 years old, I got a job as a waiter at the Mirabeau restaurant on the top of the Seattle First National Bank building. Remember that place? I
do.
Yeah, really high end. So I was like,
yeah,
setting things on fire in front of tables and stuff. It was really cool experience. And then I got into running the Nordstrom stores. It had these little sandwich shops in them back in the early 70s, and I did that. And then I had the good fortune of moving out to Duval, Washington in 1977. And we did that we bought this old Grange Hall, and there was a little funky restaurant there called the Silver Spoon. So we kept the name, because actually the Silver Spoon had been founded at the same time that I had started this restaurant in Ellensburg. And we were both kind of just hippies, trying to make, better food than you could get elsewhere.
Right.
And so that's at the Silver Spoon I got was 1977. And then, over a couple of years, just kind of building it up, we had it built up pretty well. But one day, we were really busy on the weekends, but it was a weekday for lunch. This guy came in with 2 other people, and they had lunch, and it turned out it was the guy was Jack Berg, and he was married to Ginny Riley of Riley Maloney, and the other 2 people were Riley Maloney and David Maloney and Ginny Riley. And so they were recording a record out at Bear Creek Studios, which was Joe and Manny Hadlock's gorgeous studio that they built. Strangely enough, they all went to Central as well. And my wife had gone to high school with Manny Hadlock. I forget her maiden name. But anyway, so we all kind of knew each other. And so they said, well, go have lunch at this Silver Spoon. You really like it. And so they did. And then, they just in conversation said, hey, what's going on upstairs? I see you have a second floor. And we used to have an art gallery up there. It was a co-op for the community because there's a lot of artists out there. And it was just kind of at that time, the art gallery is kind of, fizzling out as co-ops do. And so I said, well, it's pretty much empty right now. And so they took a look at it, and they decided that they were going to have their album release party at the Silver Spoon because it was close to the studio, and they just fell in love with the space. It's in a Grange Hall. It's folk music. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. So we did our very first. That's where I produced my very first concert, my myself, and that was Riley Maloney at the album release party at the Silver Spoon on the second floor of the Grange Halls. 200 people came. They loved it.
Was it a raging success or
it
abject
was
failure?
So successful, even though we made people sit on these rock hard benches with no backs to them.
Okay.
And, you know, we didn't really have, there was kind of a stage there, but we didn't have lighting. So we just hung a bar from chain down and put a clamp light on it, but we didn't really have it switched. You couldn't there was no switch anywhere for that outlet. So without turning on all the lights, right? So, or off, turning all the lights off. So the artists, when they got on stage, they pulled the string and the clamp light went on, and now you can see them. The show started thereafter.
I love it. That's awesome.
So, you know, I got, you know, a UW guy who, I think he was actually a student body president, Dan Mortensen, was doing sound for us out there because he had been doing sound for Riley Maloney, and that was the beginning of a long relationship with Dan Mortensen, one of the best sound guys in Seattle. And kind of goes with my tradition of always doing the best, you know, always trying to be the best at whatever I did. And so the sound was always really great, and the crowds love it. And you know, Riley Maloney came back, and they did kind of a regular gig there. And then pretty soon we had Uncle Bonsai playing there, and Michael Tomlinson, and all of the, you know, the bigger draws in the kind of the singer-songwriter folk scene of Seattle were coming out to the Duval to do concerts, and they were all, you know, basically selling out. And so then word got out to other artists, you know, because some of those acts were touring, and they go, "Oh, you got to play the Silver Spoon. It's really cool." And so then we started doing, you know, like Odetta, and Dave Van Ronk played there a few times. You know, I was a huge fan of Dave Van Ronk's, and you know, other, you know, the Dillards and other, mostly in the folk and bluegrass kind of vein. Even, but then we got into this whole new thing that was happening with Will Ackerman and Windham Hill Records, and so we were the first place that George Winston played in the state of Washington. Yeah, and we literally we got all of the hippies in town, and we borrowed a piano from somebody, and we hauled it up the back stairs by hand. So that George could play on this old upright that we did pay to have it tuned, but it was pretty cool. And we kind of went through all of the roster of Windham Hill. They've all played the place. And so that whole relationship is what led me into starting the Backstage in Ballard. I grew up in Ballard. And so it was actually Jack Berg had been, and Riley Maloney been playing at the Backstage for quite a few years by then, because the Silver Spoon had gone away for various reasons. And so I was contacted by the owner of the building that the Backstage was in, and he says, you know, we're really struggling. You know, we've had several owners of this place downstairs, and nobody's really making it work very well. And Jack Berg said I should talk to you. So I went in and met with the guy, and at the time I was just flat broke. So I was really interested in doing it, and it being in Ballard was another cool thing about it, and the space was pretty awesome. So I worked out a deal with him. I had, like I said, I didn't have any money, but we agreed on what my salary would be to run the place. And I said, well, but I really want to buy it. And he wanted me to buy it. He really didn't want to run it, but initially he hired me. Somehow I sold him on the fact that I could make it work. And so the first 6 months I worked for peanuts, and the rest in exchange for working up to a pot of money of $10,000 that he owed me. That then we exchanged that for all of his inventory, and I leased everything from him. So I didn't really have to buy the business. Okay. It was a good deal. It was a perfect win-win situation. It was a good deal for me. It was a really good deal for him, especially because we turned out to be so friggin' successful. You know, we went from 0 to 360 in a pretty short time.
Well, that's the venue, and I told you this the other day when we were talking. That's the venue that I can describe, but I can never remember the name of. I don't. That there's this memory. The synopsises aren't connecting. I can never remember the Backstage. I don't know why. It's just
it's because we sold alcohol.
Okay, that could be my excuse. I'll go with that because none of the other venues in Ballard sold alcohol. None of them. No.
That was one of my first lessons in running a club like that. Was we did a lot of work with radio stations because it was a 500 capacity club. So now I'm working with artists who are, like on their way up, or a lot of artists on their way down. So, and most of the artists will just play a club like that their whole careers and make a darn good living. But there was a station manager for KMPS, and we were doing the show we were doing was the first Seattle or state of Washington appearance of Garth Brooks. And so this is like in 1989 or something like that. And the radio manager told me, I was telling him, because I'd only been doing it for about 2 years. I was still struggling making we were getting by. We were successful, but still struggling making a living. And he says, well, quit trying to make money by selling music. You make music by selling beer. I make music by selling tires.
Okay.
Because radio stations, they make their money in advertising. So that was his advice is just figure, you got to price your beer accordingly, and you bring in the acts, and, you'll do better if you have that in your mind. But then I also learned how to become kind of more of a promoter than a venue owner. Promoting artists is kind of a little different. There's a different business model there. So it's a combination of two business models. One is, retail, restaurant, food service, food and beverage business, and then the concert business. So I had a lot of good advisors. I think, I've always been good at knowing what I don't know, and having people help me out.
So answer this question for me then. So you got this advice that sell beer, if you will, and the music will take care of itself. I'm oversimplifying that. You found that to be true?
Yes, it's absolutely true. You have to. Okay. Your business model is to make money selling beer and whatever else you could sell. T-shirts, get as many revenue streams as you can going, and make the venue successful. And then a lot of the artists that were coming in, especially those on their way up, like Mary Chapin Carpenter and Shawn Colvin and Lucinda Williams, all women, but there were some guys too, who were, this was their first shows. I think Mary Chapin Carpenter played the venue three times before she won this, won a Grammy Award Country Music Award. It was some kind of country music award and became a big thing. So, and so that was kind of same with Shawn Colvin. She probably played the club 3 or 4 times before she outgrew the place with and she started getting traction on radio airplay. And so then I made the transition to really know how to learn the business of being a concert promoter, and putting the two together was kind of the magic ticket for financial success to stay profitable.
So when you think of the Backstage, if I put you on the spot,
sure,
what was a memorable show for you? Is there some, does some evening rise above the rest as far as being memorable?
Oh man, there are so many, but the first one that came to my mind, and probably because there was recently an NPR story about these people, and it's a guy who's who one of those who would always play the Backstage. He was never going to, I would be presenting him as a headliner at the Paramount Theater 2 years from now, and his name was Guy Clark, and a songwriter out of Nashville. So he was one of those that came into the club every year and always sold it out. And he was always great. He was maybe a little bit too often drunk by the end of the night, but just a brilliant songwriter. And so one year he was going on tour with Townes Van Zandt, who had also played the club by solo act, and another artist who was never going to be presented at the Paramount Theater as a headliner. They were going out as a duo, and then once we published the show, I was contacted by Mickey Newberry, who's a more obscure but also a brilliant singer-songwriter of kind of the same ilk, and hung out with those guys in the earlier days. And he was now living in Oregon somewhere, down towards Salem. And so he said, I'd love to come up and open that show, be on that show with those guys, and told me this story. And so we put it all together, and Mickey Newberry, Guy Clark, and Townes Van Zandt, and at the end of the night, all three of them were on stage, and it was, Townes Van Zandt can make you laugh and cry in the same song. Is amazing, and there was just real magic about that night, and I think it was mainly because the artists were having such a good time. And that reminds me of kind of a philosophy that we live by at the Backstage, and that we didn't have any decor. That's probably another reason why you don't remember the Backstage. There was no decor. All of the walls in the stage, everything was just painted black. There was a real kind of mediocre pedestrian bar. The back bar was nothing special about the place except the artists on the stage. And so we made that always our priority, is that the most important thing to our success is that artist on the stage, and the best way you're going to have that artist do the best show possible is that they feel really good about being here. So when artists would arrive, we took really good care of them. Our green room was always clean and orderly, and we gave them good food, and the shows were well marketed and promoted, and our sound system, thanks to Dan Mortensen, was just by far the best sound system in town for any room, any size. It was just the best. And so, that's what makes artists the most happy, is to, number one, be respected, and be treated professionally when they walk in the door, and have things ready, and their dressing rooms set up and the way they want it, and then have a professional sound guy and the top-notch equipment, so that just everything goes well, and they're just, that gets them started with a great attitude.
They can do what they're good at.
Exactly.
Not have to worry about
that really easy. There's so many amazing shows that it's just hard. I think once I came up with a top 20, but I'd have to work on reassembling that. But yeah, just so
on the
many.
flip side of that, let me put you on the spot in a negative way then. Does any show come to mind that was like, oh, that didn't go well?
Oh my God, yes. there's always a fair share of those too, and it's the same story though. If the artist is not happy, whether it's you're doing or not, and some people are really not happy. I don't know if you've found that in life, but some people are just basically never ever going to be happy, and that shows when they come in the building. And there is this woman, her name was Jane Oliver. I had really never heard of her, which, you may find this surprising, but that would happen to me a lot. I'd get a call from an agent or somebody to say, hey, Jane Oliver is on tour, and, she does this and this and this, and they'd have to educate me. This was pre-internet, so I really trusted the agents, and we had, I had to have really good relationships with the agents, because, they had to know I'm a good guy, we do a good work, and they'll send us the best artists. So this was an agent that I'd not worked with much before, but I'm kind of generally a trusting person. But anyway, this woman, Jane Oliver, I have no idea how she was successful in show business ever, because she was just horrible person to me and to everyone. The sound guy left. He decided, oh, I'm going to capture this during sound check, because she was just dropping the F-bombs left and right, and was just like so mean and hurtful to the things she was saying to everybody around her, that he ran a tape, and we played it back for years. And oh man, that was our only enjoyment. And we had to. She was one of those that we had to have a local band, and we had to pick her up at the airport in a limo, and one of those things. And I remember the last thing, because the whole thing was just horrible. She kept threatening to not perform at all. It wasn't all that well attended, but there were in fact people there. Mostly people who love show tunes and New Broadway and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But as she's leaving, she's out of our hair. I thought the whole thing was over, and I get a call from the guy who's driving her and said, "You probably don't care anymore, but I want you to know that I just pulled over and I told Jane Oliver to get out of the car, and I drove away." So our driver could not tolerate her verbal abuse. And so he just pulled over, got her suitcases out of the car, and said, "Call a cab, I'm out of here." That's how bad a person she was.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So, again, I don't know how many episodes you want to cut, but I have other bad ones, but
that's just an awesome story. Let's just stop with that. That's amazing. Yeah. So God, I have no idea who this person is either. I guess I'll go. I'm going to.
You can find Wikipedia on her, I'm sure.
Okay. And by the way, is that tape still circulating? Can I find a copy of the tape? You guys made?
I don't think so. I'm horrible at that. The people that worked with me, so they saved more stuff than I ever did. I was never good at memorabilia. I mean, I have Ringo Starr's autograph on a Backstage pass I had, but that's about it.
All right.
Nina Simone's autograph, I have that too. People who are really important to me.
Important to you. Okay. I'd like to ask you about, because my connection to the Backstage was probably 84 to 89, that 5-year window ish. And I'm trying to think who I saw play there. I have a couple of, like I said, there's the 80s were a blur for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I didn't start there until 87. So there was a period. Yeah. There was a lot of ups and downs, and very sporadic. The programming was not very consistent, and various different operators and owners going through it.
So the Seattle musicians that were starting in Seattle on their way, who did you find? Who were you booking anybody from the Seattle area that you found personally on an like you're like, oh, this band's kind of cool. Like, what pops to mind there?
Well, I ended up managing them. It was a band called the Pickets, and the Pickets were kind of a grunge version of Americana, but more just kind of traditional, a little bit of original rock and roll. But they just struck me as being the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So I worked with them for 5 or 6 years, actually, until I left the Backstage and got too busy with other projects, and they kind of were not as active. You have to, they were probably more your age, or in between your age and my age. They were
Chris, you're talking about Christy McWilson.
Yes. Yeah. And that's how I got close with Scott McCoy, was by, of course, the Young Fresh Fellows played the place a lot, and I loved all those guys.
Right.
Mudhoney played the club, but you had to be, because we were 500 capacity. It's not like the Crocodile. 100 people in there made it feel like there was a crowd, whereas 100 people in the Backstage was like, hello, like, who's here?
Kind of like the Ranch was.
Yeah, it was a big place. So you have to have bigger names to make it work. You just can't have smaller acts in there. And but we took advantage of the opening situation to work with local acts. and then, of course, local musicians are really creative about putting together, 3-band lineups that, together pack a punch. And we did that as much as we could. But in booking, my priority was always to fill the calendar with national acts. And then, because those were always like 3 to 4 months out. And then I'd see where the blanks were. And if I had a weekend, I'd bring in local music to fill the gaps.
When you were running the Backstage, how many nights a week were you presenting music?
We were pretty much steady to 4 to 5 nights a week. Yeah,
Oh,
we do
okay.
about 200 to 220 shows a year.
Okay.
And yeah, that was pretty steady.
And then you moved on from the Backstage.
Yeah. In 95, actually it's 94, I had the meeting with the people who were running Bumbershoot, One Reel company. They were called One Reel Productions, and so they were running the Bumbershoot Festival for the city of Seattle. They were actually paid by city money to produce the event, and then of course they tried to earn enough money at the event to warrant what they were being paid. But so yeah, I went to work. Norm Langell was the founder and president of One Reel, and so they called me in because I was having success at what I was doing, and they were not having success at what they were doing. I think 1994 Bumbershoot had been their biggest Bumbershoot ever, and
Okay.
and so they fired the person that was doing their talent buying, and were looking for a new talent buyer. So they met with me among some other local talent buyer kind of people, promoters, and so they hired me, and I was still on the Backstage and did both jobs the year of 1995. So I programmed, I think, like 18 concerts at the Pier, Summer Nights at the Pier, 16 or 18 that first year. I know by the time I left, we were up to doing 30 concerts a year. So we kept growing the whole thing. And then, who knows how many acts I booked at Bumbershoot. Probably, I just remember being very tired on September 5th or whatever it was.
Right.
From that whole experience. And so along the way, also I had a couple little kids who were, 5 and 3, but I think they're at the age where they're both really going into school. And I really enjoyed my work at One Reel. That was just like so cool. It was just like a big step up for me. And I really enjoyed it. And plus it was kind of a 9 to 5 job most of the year. And the only time it wasn't was the summer months. And then my office was in a trailer on Pier 62. How does it get much better than that, to have your office right on the waterfront?
Yeah.
So I sold the Backstage. Kind of underlying that, besides the fact that the lifestyle at One Reel was going to be a lot more appealing. But it was also that I was having problems with the landlord, the man who owned the building. I think he had 2 other partners, but the guy who ran the building was not happy with the Backstage being in his basement anymore, because he had added 2 floors onto that building. So it was already the biggest building in Ballard. Now it was like a really big building in Ballard, and he was leasing it out to doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs and stuff like that. And no matter what he did to try to fix it, every Monday morning he'd get a ton of calls from all his tenants going, "It smells like a fucking tavern in here," So, well, that's because you're in a 1928 building that doesn't really have, they ventilate the old way by moving air throughout the building. And that was back when you could smoke at bars too. So you can only imagine like spilt beer and cigarette smoke, just like you just couldn't get rid of it. So he was just he kept making my life so difficult. And I couldn't do any sound checks before 5 p.m., which for some of the bigger national acts was really a problem. And I mean, we even got into, I just said, I'm trying to make a living here. And, he's the one benefiting from all my success because I was paying him 10% of my business to be
Right.
down there.
Okay.
And my business had grown quite a bit, so he was doing all right by me. But now he has, all this other income. And so I was kind of getting weary of that battle. And it was just kind of the timing. I had 2 years left on my 1 5-year lease, and I had another 5-year option after that. So it was a good time to sell because it was a good time to sell.
It was a good time to sell.
Yeah.
All right.
And then I had this other, really great job waiting for me. So I sold the Backstage and became a full-time one-reeler, or we called them unreal sometimes, but we were all good people doing good work. And and so that was in 95. And I stayed with One Reel for 5 years until then I got recruited away from them by Paul Allen's, big bags of money he would put out in front of people and say, I want you to come to work for me. And that was to open up EMP and to do the programming for EMP. I really wanted to do both because I really didn't want to leave One Reel. I had so much fun there and I just love those people. Still have great relationships with them. I mean, I got to be part of the opening team of Teatro Zinzanni, and 5 nights a week at Teatro Zinzanni, I got to work with Ann Wilson, who, that's a good story. It's the whole Wilson sisters, if you want me to. That goes. Ties it all together because it kind of goes through my whole career and ended at Benaroya Hall not too long ago. So when I owned the Silver Spoon out in Duval. Heart, of course, was an East Side band. They came out of the Bellevue area, Lake Hills, I think it was. And so Nancy Wilson used to come into the restaurant all the time, really regularly, and just sit and have tea and maybe have lunch, and then the rest of the band would come out. Ann never was with the rest of the band typically. It was always the other guys. But, I knew that Hart was at the Silver Spoon because we had a pretty small parking lot, and there'd be 5 Saab 900 turbos, convertibles, all the same color, all the same year, parked in the parking lot. And that meant that Hart was in the restaurant.
So the band members all drove the same car?
Yeah, as it turns out, they told me that Columbia Records bought each one of them their own Saab Turbo convertible.
Okay.
When they signed them, there's there's lots of stories about record industry and how that works, but but anyway, so I my relationship with them goes way back to those days, and became friends with many of them and hung out with them privately and. Been to some of their homes and so then I got to, work with Ann Wilson. She was the original chanteuse singer at Teatro Zinzanni back in 1998. And that was really a great experience to see that thing happen. It was just so otherworldly, just so fantastic. Anyway, so.
We kind of glossed over the whole EMP thing.
Yes.
So what was that like? Because what was it like on the inside of it? How's
horrible.
that? Okay.
That's why it's always been messed up. It goes back to happy people, unhappy people, okay. I think, but in my mind, but there's, doing that booking was like I just couldn't say no to it. They wanted me to put together kind of a retrospective of the Seattle music scene. And so, one stage, one day I had, Marilee Rush and the Turnabouts and Paul Revere and the Raiders and Jimmy Hanna and the Dynamics and, all of those old rock bands. The Sonics were not playing at that time. I always tried to get Jerry to go back to work and do a gig, but that took many more years after I gave up. He finally did, but The Wailers, the Fabulous Wailers out of Tacoma. It was just an incredible retrospective of the '60s Seattle music scene.
Right.
One day on the mural stage, and then of course we had all of these monster acts in the Coliseum that were just kind of a pain in the ass, but it sold tickets, and Paul wanted it to be a huge blowout. So, and we were paying people ridiculous money. But my favorite part of booking that thing was one of the aspects of the museum was a thing called Funk Blast, and Funk Blast was a kind of in a separate, weird part of the building it was kind of like a Disneyland ride where you sat in theater seats and they moved and wind blew in your face and you felt like you were actually on a roller coaster kind of thing. And it was a journey through the funk music scene. And so in preparation for that, they flew me down to Los Angeles and then, a taxi ride out to Sony Studios where they were on the lot, big. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life, but they were filming this. They were making this video that then ended up being a ride at EMP. And I remember hearing that they were already spent $20 million on this thing, and that they were probably going to be spending more. So my job was to create a live show out of that. So in going down to Hollywood and being on set, I got to talk to all the guys who were part of putting that all together. And I'm sorry, the guy's name escapes me right now, but he was James Brown's #1 guy in the day, in the early days. He was, if you watch any of the documentaries or life stories of James Brown, his character is always there because he was really important to James' success as kind of his manager and guide. He guided him through the craziness of James Brown. So that reminds me why working with James Brown is so important, because I'd had him at Summer Nights at the Pier too. So I knew what working with him was like, and it's a little bit of chaos. Anyway, working with some people who were really close to all of those musicians, we put together this show that was in the Key Arena unfortunately, it was on the same day that I had built this great retrospective of Seattle's rock and roll on the grounds. So we had the opening act was the original JBs, which had their own funk, hits, and then the middle act was Maceo Parker, who had a long career with James Brown. And then, of course, James Brown was the headliner of the show. And we tried to replicate as much as possible of what it was, what the video was like inside. So we had, lots of Mylar strips falling from the ceiling at various times. And it was pretty cool. It was a pretty awesome show. And unknown to everybody, including myself, was that Prince sat in with James Brown on his set. He played keyboards in the background where really nobody could see him. And he was wearing an oversized hat.
Not Prince. Never wear.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
No. Wow.
So anyway, that was a really cool show. But my favorite story of that whole thing was that my job was also to advance the shows with the artist management, tour managers or artist management. And so, there was a lot of moving parts. I must have booked over 150 acts just for that one weekend, 3 days of shows.
Jeez.
And so when it came down to James Brown showing up, I know that I had said this many times because I'd worked with him before. I knew that he's kind of a cash guy. A lot of those old school artists have to be paid in cash all the time. So I was really made sure I was clear to say they do not handle cash on any of these shows. They pay in advance. Of course, your deposit, and if you need any other money, we can have a cashier's check waiting for you, or even wire to your bank and show you evidence of it. Whatever. It's like this. We this is how we have to work. It's just the way it has to work. So of course, James Brown shows up with his tour manager, who I don't really know his real name. He was just, everybody called him the judge. So I called him the judge. And so the judge says, well, of course I need to be paid in cash before he goes on stage. And I go, no, now we've gone over this so many times in the last couple of months that it was part of the offer. It's in writing here. I held my offer in front of him. It's not going to happen. And he says, well, James Brown's not going to go on. So I let the people who were my superiors in the organization know that James Brown is not going to go on unless he gets paid in cash. And they said, well, that's crazy. That's not going to happen. And I said, okay, well, we'll just do the show with the JBs and Maceo Parker. It'll be great. And then I get a call about a half an hour after they say that's just not going to happen. And they say, well, we just had a meeting with the mayor and the president of Seafirst Bank and the president of the Seattle Center, and we have your $100,000 ready for you. So $100,000 in cash. I've never in my life ever had that much money.
Did you have a briefcase with a handcuff on you?
I did.
Oh, did you really?
I did. I didn't have a handcuff though, but I had I had my briefcase, and so I called the cell phones were not everybody had cell phones back then, so I was trying to get a message to the judge. Okay, I got the money after all. I'm here. Come on down. And he never got back to me, so I was stuck with this $100,000 in cash in a briefcase that I couldn't just leave somewhere. And when you guys watch this while I go to the bathroom, I had to carry it with me everywhere. And I wasn't about to go out on the Seattle Center grounds carrying $100,000 in cash. I really wanted to go see that show over at the mural stage. So I was stuck in the Key Arena all day, carrying $100,000 in cash, waiting for the judge to show up. So I did, do the deed with the judge, and he had to count it twice, which, means I was watching this man count money for about a half an hour, with very little being said, just the sounds of $100 bills hitting the table over and over again. So I finally got rid of that $100,000 and could breathe again. And, everybody got ridiculous amounts, like just amounts of money. James Brown had just played, he had played a gig at the Pier 2 years before for $30,000. So.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to ask. Okay, James Brown gets $100,000.
No, $200,000.
Is that normal?
We paid him the deposit in advance. He was getting paid $200,000 for one show. Okay. Oh, we paid everybody stupid money. I won't go into it because maybe I can be sued by somebody, I think. But
no, we don't want that. We don't want that.
Wow. It was obscene amounts of money.
That's crazy. So overall, the EMP thing was, you were part of the launch.
Yeah.
And then though, I'm reading your bio and you got McCaw Hall, Benaroya Hall.
Yeah, that's because EMP dumped me as soon as I don't know if it's because I couldn't, do the cash deal or what, but all these promises that I was going to be their programming director of this, brand new museum. I was just thought, man, this is the greatest, highest profile job for a talent buyer you could ever imagine. And, their organization was, people were being fired just like every day. You go, really? They're not here anymore? I thought they were in charge. Okay. It was just chaos inside, internal.
Well, I'd like to... Well, before we continue on, I'm going to pause here and say that this is probably going to end up being a two-part conversation because we're going to talk about SeaTac, and I think we're going to have your wife on that one.
Yes.
So we're going to leave that one off. So we might just truncate it like that. But it says here, and what I'd like to know is, so you were promoting shows at the Paramount in the Moore.
Yes.
Who were you bringing to the Paramount Theater?
Most of the artists I presented were artists who started their gigs at the Backstage. So it was Mary Chapin Carpenter, it was Shawn Colvin, it was Lucinda Williams, Richard Thompson, on and on. Chris Isaak. I always say Chris Isaak was the best show at the Backstage that I never saw.
Why didn't you see that show?
Well, because I was also presenting. Here's another person who I presented at larger venues is Ani DeFranco, and she was just kind of starting out, and so I had her booked at the Backstage, and then I get a call from an agent that I work with a lot, and he represents Chris Isaak, and Chris had this new album coming out, and he wanted to open. He wanted to have like this promo gig in Seattle. And as it turns out, the reason why he did that is because he had been working on that movie, the Twin Peaks movie, up here at the time, or around that time, or before that time, actually. But so he made a lot of friends and stuff, and he wanted to come up and do this promo show in Seattle. It was just all for the record release, and they usually play an undersized venue and give away the tickets, and it's a big deal, and everybody's talking about it. So anyway, I had to go back to Ani DeFranco's agent and say, I hate to do this, but I've got a chance to do this gig, and I can find another venue for Ani DeFranco easily because she's only going to sell like 150 tickets, at the most. And, so the agent totally understood. And so I presented Ani DeFranco that night at the Weathered Wall, which is a historic venue of that era. In the early 90s. A great venue right across from the Westin Hotel, downtown Seattle. And so I was down at the Weathered Wall working the Ani DeFranco concert while...
And Chris Isaak was
at the Backstage. So I get all done. The show's great with Ani, and I pay her, and she's happy and takes off, and I get back to the club, and it's, of course... all empty except for my staff who are all sitting around the bar just going, that was the best show I've ever seen in my life. And, they told me stories for the next 2 hours over beers at the bar after midnight about how great a show it was. Evidently, all of the friends he had made in Seattle while making that movie were all strippers at local strip bars. And so they all were on the guest list and, ended up doing what they do,
right?
And as part of the show, and evidently the crowd loved it.
Oh my!
And Chris Isaak was playing his guitar wireless, and he was playing it walking on the bar, which is there's a really long bar. It goes up one whole wall to Backstage, and while doing that, he tripped and fell and broke his nose. So, but the show went on, and.
The best show at the Backstage that you never saw.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
Yeah, there was so much. I could go on for days.
That's just it. I mean, we have to, we could, I know we can continue this for a long, long time. So questions I love to ask music people. So I'm going to kind of run some questions by you. And now you're going to be a little biased because you've owned venues, but where's your all-time favorite venue in Washington State? It's always got to be Washington State. So it can just be Seattle. That's fine. But Washington State to see music.
The Backstage.
And if we could indulge that, who would you want to see at the Backstage?
Anybody. I mean,
oh no, you get to pick. You get to pick. Who would you want to see? Like if we could recreate, like we could roll time back to when you owned it. And but we're gonna, this is the it's total make believe. So you can pick any performer you want.
Yeah,
from any era. Who would you want to see?
Well, because it was the first album I ever bought, and kind of my original, music love would be Ray Charles.
Okay. Have you ever seen Ray Charles perform?
Oh yes, I went and saw him at Parker's Ballroom about the same time I owned the Backstage. But he could do 1,000 tickets, and I could only do 500. Out at Parker, so I couldn't compete. But I was in there.
Okay.
I was in the running. There was others that I tried to get. I tried to get Nina Simone a number of times, but she just wasn't working in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
She was kind of an expat in Paris at the time, because I was a big fan of hers. There's others that I would have liked to have seen there. I can't think of their names right now. It'll come to me.
So if I put you on the spot, Washington State musicians that you've seen perform.
Yes.
Who's the most, I'll use the word iconic, Washington State performer that you've ever seen perform live?
Wow. Well, again, that list could be really long. I mean, I had the good fortune of seeing Jimi Hendrix at the Arena in 1968.
How was that show?
It was really amazing. And then I saw him again in 1969 at the Key Arena. Yeah, it was at Key Arena.
Okay.
And then he played Six Stadium after that. So I didn't, for some reason, I was unavailable to go to that show.
I think it was raining that day is the story.
Yes. Well, in my first year at Bumbershoot, we did a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, and we had all the original band and a lot of the other people that he'd played with over the years, and then aired all of the best guitar players of Bumbershoot, including just people that we had booked that no one has ever heard of, but they were still really great guitar players. We had them part of the show, and so the last time I saw Jimi Hendrix play was in the Coliseum or Key Arena, whichever you remember. Now, what's it called? Yeah. Something else.
Climate Pledge.
Yeah.
Something.
So anyway, at the end of that Hendrix show, all the house lights went out, and all you heard was his guitar reverberating in the speaker. And he had left the stage, but then there was these bright flashes of light coming in from all the doorways, and there was a huge lightning storm going on. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. And so there was this huge lightning storm that we all assumed that Jimi Hendrix conjured up for his grand finale. And as we were leaving, we were all getting soaked with this downpour and lightning. It was just really, really amazing. So then, go 20 years forward, and we're doing this tribute to Jimi Hendrix at Memorial Stadium, Seattle Center Grounds. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the show, I feel a few raindrops, and then pretty soon there's these huge flashes of lightning, and there's just this huge downpour. The Monday night, the closing night of Bumbershoot, 1995. It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah. I did not see Hendrix, and my friends that have seen Hendrix all tell variations of your story. Yeah. I mean, in other words, it was something magical every time they saw him.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot to be proud of in Washington State. Holy cow! I mean, so many great artists, and doing the airport now. We always like to tell people how the diversity of the music is demonstrated on the overhead music that you hear in the airport now, because they play everything from Kenny G to Macklemore.
Right.
So it's just so many great artists, and I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of them.
So to wrap this episode up, let's go there, because what I'd like you to explain, just real high level for us, is your involvement at SeaTac Airport and that program.
Sure. So I was, this was in 2012. I had been hired to be the programming manager for Benaroya Hall. My job was to bring in non-symphonic music that could sell tickets because the number of dates done by the symphony had been diminishing year by year as the crowds were diminishing. And so they had a lot of open nights. And so the trend then was for venues, rather than rely on independent promoters, they started buying their own talent, like the Paramount does that. And so Benaroya Hall jumped on that bandwagon and hired me to program the big room, the taper hall where the 2,500 seats, as also the 500 capacity little hall that they had. So I was doing that, and part of that, we wanted to in marketing, I had this idea for marketing that we should bring in local musicians who are, top of their game. Some of them could be symphony players or just, singer-songwriters. There's just so many good musicians in Seattle, and have them perform busker style, like Pike Place Market style, but out on the 3rd Avenue lobby, where they had a Starbucks and a little cafe, and it was just going to be a lunch hour thing. So, but we needed funding for it because we needed to pay the musicians. We needed to pay a sound guy to run sound for it, but very simple, small setup. So that was the idea. Looking for money, knowing that the building was owned by the city of Seattle, I contacted James Kevlis, who at the time was the director of the Office of Film and Music for the city. And so I met with James down at Benaroya Hall, and he said, "That's a really great idea. I'm going to try to find you some money." And in fact, he did find us some money to do that programming in Benaroya Hall. But the Benaroya Hall people, they have lawyers and stuff, and they made it way too complicated. And anyway, it was just dragging out. And so James Kevlis came back to me and said, I've been thinking about what you want to do at Benaroya Hall, and I've also been really involved in helping the Port of Seattle at SeaTac Airport bring what they're calling Experience the City of Music theme to the airport. So at the time they had already changed all the overhead music to be all local artists on the overhead music, and they had some famous artists like Macklemore and Anna Nancy Wilson and stuff doing all the overhead announcements, all the TSA announcements. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for a way to do live music, but doing live music in an airport is really complicated. There was a program in existence at both Nashville and Austin's airports, and both of those were kind of based on the music being in one of the bars in the airport. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted something a little bit different than that. And James knew of my idea for the Benaroya Hall thing, so he got me a meeting with the SeaTac people. And mm-hmm. because I was working for Benaroya Hall, the whole presentation was this would be a Benaroya Hall marketing thing. So it would be exposing what's going on at Benaroya Hall to all the travelers coming in at SeaTac Airport. So it would be a real benefit, it'd be a win-win-win for everybody. And so, mm-hmm. But again, the attorneys that work for the nonprofits, both Benaroya Hall is a separate nonprofit from the symphony, but they shared an attorney who helped them, and a really good guy, but he just really made things way too complicated. And so again, the Port of Seattle people said, never mind, this is, we're just going to pass on this. This is just not what we had in mind. This is getting way too complicated. So I said, hey, I'll do it for you. If you really want music, and if you like my idea, it's my idea. I've got permission from my employers at Benaroya Hall to just do this myself. And so they didn't really know my background. They didn't know, really who I was in the local community. So they did their homework. They weren't originally, or they didn't start off being terribly enthused about the idea. But and then, thankfully James Kevlis spoke very highly of me, and I did have a good track record. And so they gave me a chance at, just trying it out. They said, well, let's just try it out for 12 weeks. We'll pay the musician, we'll pay you or somebody to be here to, help make it happen, because they were sold on the whole concept of what, I had presented on behalf of Benaroya Hall, which was, we're doing this at really no cost because we'll gain the marketing from it. So mm-hmm. I didn't have any money in it for me as the, owner of this new enterprise. So that whole first year, the 12-week trial basis after 6 weeks was moved to a 12-month permanent program. They couldn't make it longer because it would require going out to a request for proposal because they're a government agency. So that program for the first year with maybe a couple dozen musicians, and It was a total of 10 gigs per week, Monday through Friday. And it was just so hugely successful for everybody, the musicians more than anybody else, but also the travelers loved it. It became the number one favorable comment that they get on their surveys that they're always taking in the airport.
You mean TSA doesn't get number one?
No, I know. It surprised me too. But we probably knocked them out of the number one
okay.
spot. So that's good.
Couldn't resist.
No, I know. Matter of fact, that was one of the biggest challenges, was getting musicians with their gear passed through TSA. I mean, they finally warmed up to the idea and started accommodating us, but at first they were just thought we were criminals for sure.
Right.
So, it just got started, and it just got its own momentum. And not only did the Port of Seattle put it out for RFP for a 3-year contract that we, of course, won and won again and now won again. So we're into our 10th year of business with Gigs for You, and it's continues to be successful, and it's quite a story that deserves its own episode.
And that's where we're going to stop, because they're going to have to tune in and hear that story shortly.
Okay.
So what, though, I feel like I always have to end it this way. What did I overlook? I mean, you've had a long career. I mean, I know we overlooked a lot.
Well, no,
is there something that I overlooked you want to bring up?
There's lots of great stories is all. And, that can happen anytime, and I'm not going to forget them for sure. But
okay.
What I think the thing that was overlooked is really this really, truly significant impact that this airport program has had on local musicians. And it has already, and it will for hopefully years and years to come, and will go a long, long ways to cementing Seattle as a good place for artists to come and develop their career.
Awesome. Well, Ed, thank you so much for taking the time today to make this happen. The best thing about this show for me is I always enjoy the conversations. I get to learn stuff. I get to talk to people that have done amazingly interesting things, and you have excelled at all of that. So I appreciate your time.
Well, great. It's been great talking to you too. We'll look forward to the next one.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.